Welcome to Echo Crime YouTube channel. The Quiet Escape. It was still dark over St. Louis, Missouri, when the clock struck 4 a.m. on September 21st, 2023. Inside Mercy Hospital South, the halls were quiet. The rhythmic hum of machines, the muted voices of nurses finishing night rounds, and the steady shuffle of custodial carts. But down one corridor, inside a single patient room, a chain of events was about to unfold that would baffle correctional officers across the state. The man in that room was Tommy Wayne Boyd, 45 years old, a convicted violent offender from the Potosi Correctional Center. He'd been transferred here the previous evening for what officials called routine medical evaluation. To hospital staff, he looked like any patient in a gray sweatshirt, hooked up to monitors. To the two correctional officers assigned to guard him, he was a high-risk inmate, someone they were told never to leave alone. But hospitals aren't prisons. Their walls are built for healing, not confinement. Doors open automatically. Nurses come and go. Patients shuffle past in wheelchairs. Security depends not on fences, but on routine. And routine, as it turned out, was exactly what Tommy Boyd needed. According to investigators, the guards on duty had spent a long night by his bedside. One stepped out briefly to get paperwork from the nurse's station. Another followed standard procedure to alert hospital staff they'd be momentarily away. It was only a few minutes, but in those few minutes, the patient in the bed, the prisoner, moved. Surveillance cameras later showed Boyd rising slowly, unhooking his monitor cables, and pulling on the gray hospital sweater he'd been issued. He looked calm, deliberate. He didn't run, he walked. The CCTV footage captured him moving past an open door, turning left down a dim hallway, and disappearing out of frame. At 4:03 a.m., the security camera above the hospital's emergency exit caught his silhouette pushing through the door into the early morning fog. No alarms sounded. It was a hospital door, not a cell block. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty, lit by pale blue streetlights reflecting on wet asphalt. He crossed it like any patient stepping out for a breath of fresh air. By the time the guards returned, he was gone. The next call came over the St. Louis County Police radio just before dawn. Be on the lookout for escaped inmate Tommy Wayne Boyd, male, 45, last seen leaving Mercy Hospital South wearing gray clothing and orange socks. Every nearby patrol unit went on alert. Roadblocks went up. Neighborhoods were notified through emergency text alerts. Newsrooms scrambled for details, calling the Missouri Department of Corrections and the St. Louis County Police Department. At first, the public feared the worst, that a dangerous prisoner had fled into residential neighborhoods. But detectives familiar with his background knew Boyd wasn't running toward anyone. He was running away. Years of incarceration had carved quiet endurance into him. He'd spent half his life behind fences, and now, for the first time in years, the door to the outside world had swung open. By sunrise, the hospital grounds were crawling with investigators. Officers reviewed camera footage, interviewed nurses, and reconstructed the escape minute by minute. The picture that emerged was astonishingly simple. He'd slipped away in silence, using nothing but timing, opportunity, and calm. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live images of police cruisers clustered outside the hospital entrance. Local anchors called it a breach in the system, a reminder that even high-security protocols can fail when human fatigue and ordinary procedure overlap. Residents nearby described waking to alerts on their phones. Inmate escaped from hospital. Stay indoors. Call 911 if seen. For a few tense hours, St. Louis held its breath. Within hours, a coordinated manhunt was underway. U.S. Marshals joined local police, sweeping nearby woods, bus stops, and abandoned buildings. Officers believed Boyd might be seeking shelter or transportation out of the area. They canvassed convenience stores and interviewed taxi drivers. For nearly a day, he stayed invisible. But security cameras in a neighborhood about 5 miles away caught a familiar shape. A man in a hospital sweatshirt and orange socks walking along a side street, head down, hands in pockets. He wasn't hiding in shadows. He was simply walking. That single frame gave police the lead they needed. By late afternoon, A tactical unit moved into the area. Witnesses reported seeing officers converge near a bus stop. Moments later, the radio crackled. Suspect in custody. Repeat, suspect in custody. The arrest was uneventful. Boyd didn't resist. When asked how he'd managed to escape, he reportedly said quietly, "I just walked out." He was taken back into custody and transported directly to the St. Louis County Justice Center, then returned to the Potosi facility. The Missouri Department of Corrections immediately opened an internal investigation into hospital transport procedures. How many officers are assigned per inmate, how rest breaks are scheduled, and whether additional restraints are permitted under medical regulations. Within days, news outlets across the U.S. ran headlines. Convicted inmate escapes through hospital door. Missouri prisoner walks out of Mercy Hospital under guard. Officials confirmed no one was harmed. The investigation, a door left open. The morning after Tommy Wayne Boyd's escape, the halls of Mercy Hospital South looked the same, but the atmosphere was different. What had been just another quiet night shift had turned into a full-scale investigation. Every door, hallway, and camera angle was now evidence. Detectives from the St. Louis County Police Department arrived before sunrise, joined by agents from the U.S. Marshal Service and the Missouri Department of Corrections Internal Affairs Division. Their goal was simple: reconstruct the escape second by second. The first step was reviewing the CCTV footage. Technicians rewound the tapes to 3:50 a.m., the last confirmed sighting of the guards at Boyd's bedside. They watched as one officer exited the room, paperwork in hand, and another followed briefly after, likely for a radio check. Then, just 3 minutes later, the patient in the bed stirred. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He simply removed his monitoring cables, folded his blanket neatly, and stood up. Then, without hesitation, he walked to the door, looked both ways, and stepped into the corridor. The clock on the screen read 4:01 and 13 seconds a.m. That was it, one investigator said later. No alarms, no warning, no resistance. Just a man walking out of his own story. When detectives interviewed hospital staff, one nurse admitted she thought the man leaving the room was a regular patient. He looked calm, she said. He didn't look like someone escaping. He looked like someone who'd just been discharged. That, investigators realized, was the key: perception. The hospital staff weren't correctional officers. They saw patients, not prisoners. And in those early hours, perception was all it took for a man in custody to become invisible. Procedurally, each inmate hospitalized outside prison walls must remain under 24-hour armed guard. But the internal report later revealed that Boyd had been left unsupervised for approximately 7 minutes, long enough to move across 2 corridors, down a service hallway, and out through an emergency exit. That door wasn't supposed to open easily, but hospitals aren't designed for lockdowns. For 20 hours, St. Louis County lived with a question that echoed through every news station. Where is Tommy Wayne Boyd? Police patrols scoured highways and alleys, while residents locked their doors and checked porch cameras. Helicopters circled above neighborhoods as reporters described the scene with steady urgency. But for all the manhunt's intensity, Tommy was already miles away, blending into the background of a city just waking up. Surveillance images later showed him walking calmly down Tesson Ferry Road, the hospital shrinking behind him. The image was haunting in its simplicity. A man in a gray sweatshirt and orange socks, head down, hands in pockets, walking through morning mist as if heading nowhere in particular. To detectives, it looked less like a breakout and more like a quiet retreat, a man escaping not with violence, but with stillness. Late that afternoon, around 5:45 p.m., a resident near South County Center Mall called 911. They'd seen a man matching the description, sitting quietly behind a dumpster, drinking water from a hospital cup. Within minutes, squad cars converged on the area. There was no chase, no struggle. Officers approached cautiously, weapons lowered. "Tommy, let's talk," one of them said. He looked up, tired but calm. "I just needed to breathe," he replied. He surrendered without a word. His brief taste of freedom, less than a full day, was over. When he was placed back into custody, He reportedly thanked the officers for not hurting him. That moment struck many watching the body cam footage later. The strange politeness of a man who'd shaken an entire state simply by walking through a door. Once Boyd was secured back in the Potosi Correctional Center, the real storm began, not in the streets, but in the headlines. Every major outlet ran the same question: how did this happen? The Missouri Department of Corrections announced a comprehensive review of hospital protocols, and the hospital itself tightened its security partnerships. For weeks, the escape dominated the local news cycle, not because of violence, but because of how human it seemed. There were no dramatic confrontations, no mastermind plans. Just a man who saw an open hallway and made a choice. Public opinion was divided. Some blamed correctional officers for negligence. Others blamed a system that stretched staff too thin. But many quietly admitted something deeper. They understood the impulse, that moment when confinement, even briefly, becomes unbearable. It wasn't about crime, one columnist wrote. It was about timing, trust, and the fragile space between freedom and routine. Lessons for the system. The escape forced state and federal correctional facilities to look hard at their procedures. For decades, inmate hospitalizations were seen as low-risk logistics. Boyd's case proved otherwise. Within months, Missouri implemented new dual escort rules, digital check-ins, and proximity alarms for all external medical transfers. 2 officers, minimum per patient. No breaks without overlap coverage. No unmonitored access to exits. Mercy Hospital also invested in upgraded CCTV systems and added new internal locks on certain corridors. They didn't want to be remembered as the place where an inmate simply walked out. And quietly, other states followed. Training manuals across the U.S. now reference the Boyd case, not for its violence, but for its simplicity. Inside the mind of an escape. Criminologists later analyzed the event for what it revealed about human behavior. Boyd wasn't a planner. He was an opportunist. Decades of confinement had conditioned him to notice details others missed. The rhythm of guards changing shifts, the sound of doors unlocking, the moment routine replaced vigilance. Experts called it institutional instinct, a kind of hyper-awareness developed by long-term inmates, a sensitivity to patterns that, one night, gave Boyd a window of freedom. He didn't break the system. One behavioral analyst said, he walked through the spaces the system forgot. In the end, that was the real story. Not the escape itself, but what it exposed, the invisible cracks between policy and human nature. Months later, life at Mercy Hospital South returned to normal. Patients came and went, doctors did their rounds, and the night shifts continued. But those who'd been there that night said things never felt quite the same. The sound of a door closing, the sight of a patient walking alone, everything carried a little more weight. At the prison, Boyd's name faded from headlines but lingered in the air. Officers who'd once escorted him now used his story as a lesson for new recruits. As one warden put it, he didn't escape a prison, he escaped detention. In a world filled with dramatic crimes and sensational escapes, Tommy Wayne Boyd's story stood out for its stillness. There were no explosions, no broken locks, just a man, a bed, and a door that shouldn't have been open. He didn't run to freedom. He walked into it. For less than 20 hours, he breathed unfiltered air, watched cars pass, and felt what it was like to be unseen. And then, just as quietly, it ended. To law enforcement, it was a breach to be fixed. To society, it was a moment to be studied. But to those who heard his story, it was a haunting reminder that even the most secure walls can't contain the simplest human instinct of all, the need to feel free.